So since I don't know Kip, I'm just going to introduce myself, and then maybe
Okay.
like Jes, and then Kip, you can introduce yourself. So my name's Kristin Tieche, and I'm, as Jes said, I'm a producer, director. I'm also an editor. And
Awesome.
since COVID started happening, all I've basically been doing is editing from here, right here, for like a year. And I've been working on this show. Thankfully, I got like offered a job, and so that's been keeping me busy. So I've been editing a television show for Court TV. So it's kind of like definitely not the genre that I hope to work in for the rest of my life, but it's a job.
It's a job.
Yeah. And then I'm making a film. Right now. My first documentary feature. It's called The Invisible Mammal, and it's about bats. So that's who I am.
And Kip, if you wanna introduce yourself too.
Yeah, my name is Kip Pearson. I'm sort of a newbie filmmaker, just jumping into it in my retirement. Started out, writing the story that had been in my head for 20 years, and that led to getting connected with Scary Cow and a 48-hour film shoot, and one thing led to another. And I decided I wanted to make my own film, which I started to put together. Once COVID hit, I'd already written it. I thought, well, if I can get a crew in place and if I can get a cast and the location. So I just planned it, like I was going to shoot it. And I got it done. We did 6 days of shooting, in September and October, and I got it edited, and it's actually going to be premiered online, in a couple weekends.
Cool.
So I'm pretty excited that I actually put a film together under COVID. We had to film with COVID officers and masks and all of that, but I did it, and I'm totally got the bug, and I have another one I want to film this next year. So I'm just looking to expand my my network, in the Bay Area. I live in Marin.
Cool.
My crew is mostly Scary Cow folks, and I just want to meet as many people as I can and work with more women, specifically on the next one. And that's why I'm here. So.
Well, you're in the right place.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that, you joined in, because now, knowing where you're coming from and what you're looking for, I can get way more specific than this boring lecture I had planned. So hi, Liz, how's it going?
Liz is here now.
Hi.
I was impressed, but it was all about acting, not like doc stuff. So I left.
Nice. Well, welcome. I actually mostly do documentaries as a cinematographer, so I'd be happy to talk doc. If you don't mind, what do you do, and what brought you to cinematography?
Well, I was an editor for a long time, working on other people's docs, and I finally made my own and realized, I have a lot to learn about shooting.
I think mostly I was making, this whole speech kind of about like the pathway of how I became a DP, becoming a DP, and also sort of like the secret sauce that's been kind of working for me throughout the years. But kind of knowing, going back to Liz and knowing that you wanted to learn a little bit more about, shooting docs, I think I'm just going to kind of skip some of my slides and show you something that I think is really interesting about docs. I'm going to share my screen with y'all. Here, let me do this. So yeah, what I kind of find interesting about, the whole like documentary camera world is that it's so different from feature, and we can kind of get, I don't know if you did a scripted piece, Kip, but if you did, we can kind of talk about scripted pieces as well. Oops, sorry, 1 second here. It's not letting me go back. But what I think, for me as a cinematographer, it really started with, okay, like I want to make a certain kind of aesthetic of filmmaking, and my certain kind of aesthetic, like how do I get there? And also how do I work with certain kinds of directors, producers, collaborators whose work I wanted to be like. And for me, it was mostly doc. And then it was also like kind of like this hybrid mixture. Like I'm thinking more of like Nomadland, or just kind of like, Anthony Bourdain's, series, or like Chef's Table. Like that's really what was like calling to me in terms of like aesthetic that I was looking to do. So that's why I like really to myself said, okay, I need to get the cameras that are going to play on the platforms that I want. And I think this is really important, like for you possibly, because if you're like, okay, like I might want to sell to Netflix, like I might want to sell to these bigger platforms like Amazon. These are the cameras that people are using. And actually, Netflix won't accept you if you don't use a certain kind of camera.
Wow.
Which is a catch-22 because like, you know, before we could just to film festivals, as long as it's in a certain resolution size, we could submit to them. Netflix isn't accepting that anymore. So, you know, you got to think about distribution and what you're filming with way ahead of time. So just pointing, I mean, this is like the most cameras that were used, but there's a huge list. You can just Google this, like Netflix cameras, and it will give you the full list of every camera that can be used on Netflix. So I think it's a good place to start if you're looking to, you know, purchase your next camera for your next doc. I also think, you know, this could also pertain to you, Kip, if, you know, you're hiring a cinematographer and you're low budget, you might want to think, man, I need to hire the cinematographer that has, you know, at least this level of camera. Otherwise, it won't be able to play.
Right.
I want it distributed there.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So just kind of throwing that out there.
That's really good information. I wonder if there's standards like that for other networks though.
Netflix this is kind of tricky. So Netflix is kind of creating the standard right now, at least in the camera world. Honestly, like that's the whole reason why I left Canon and went to Sony, was just because Sony was becoming cheaper and also giving the same resolution size, and Netflix was accepting Sony. So like those three factors, I was like, okay, I could either go to an Alexa Mini, right? Alexa RE series and look at like a $40,000 camera. All of a sudden, all my doc budgets would go out the window. I couldn't really work that many docs, right? Because the camera rental is like at least $400 a day. So in my mind, I just said, okay, what is the cheaper camera that I can get? And also smaller, right? Like I've been on docs where it's like, it was all 5Ds for a minute. Like 5D was like the doc standard for a second. And now like, you know, Netflix is like, the resolution's not good enough. It needs to be like 4K. It needs to be this specific camera now. So now we're not getting away with those same things. So actually, even recently, I heard that Amazon took away all their documentary feature films, mostly because the picture quality, the cameras that they were using aren't good enough. So they kind of just like are taking away a lot of these feature films, which I think is crazy. But moving forward, you know, we want to like to start to plan those like way ahead of time.
Yeah. Okay.
I had heard that a bunch of docs got kicked off of Amazon, but I hadn't heard why. That kind of makes sense, I guess. So.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's such a shame, but you know, especially like hiring practices and all of that in the future, I think, you know, me as being a DP, I'm becoming more and more as a stronger collaborator, especially with documentary. Like, I think when it comes to feature, it's more of like the food chain's the same, you know, like I'm still like below the line, and, you know, I have like a crew and a team. But when it comes to documentary, a lot of times I'm a co-collaborator. I'm like right there with the subjects. I'm very much so in it. A lot of filmmakers that I know, like some award-winning, I'm just thinking of Alexandria Bombach is won Best Directing at Sundance, and she shoots all of her things too. And documentary is very much so, I shoot it. Sometimes I'll do the sound on it. They're directing it, they're producing it. I mean, they're wearing so many hats at once that this is just like a whole nother, you know, thing with it, which I think is why it's kind of, in my opinion, I would like to get away from that side of documentary, and I would like to start having departments, if you can afford it, you know, like Netflix is buying, you might as well try to like get that development grant and you know, get yourself.
What camera are you using now? Like, what's your new standard?
So I'm mostly shooting with, so my main camera now, it was the Sony FX7. That was sort of the older line. They just came out with a Sony FX9. The Sony FX9 is like a 5.6, meaning like pixel sensor. So it's a little bit bigger than 4K. Do I ever use it? No, not really, but
not right now.
Right now. Yeah. But the picture quality is incredible. It's 12-bit resolution, meaning the color science is looking way more like Ari. I can get really close to Ari with the right lenses on it. The price point is pretty high. I would say, like, you know, for someone maybe like Liz, if this is like your part-time thing that you're trying to get into, kind of like the side, like me, like I'm like a side editor. Like, is it my like main squeeze? No, I'm mostly a DP, but you know, I have a basic little laptop that I'll edit from, and I'm not going to spend as much money on that. And I would recommend for you, if you were like, hey, Sony sounds great, go with the FX6, because it's basically the FX9, except it's so much smaller, way better for docs. It's like actually this big, and it's 4K. It does 120. Oh, it does 120 at 4K. It just does some amazing stuff, and people are losing their mind over this camera. And it's like 5K brand new from B&H.
Wow. How's it in low light?
It's pretty good in low light. It has 2 native ISOs, which makes it really special. It's kind of like the Sony Venice in that way. So it's like the FX. I don't want to get too technical, but basically it's pretty good in low light. I mean, it's not amazing. It's not like the A7S series, but it will get you, if you're going to go low light, I would say the FX6 before I'd say the FX9.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I not too long ago, I bought the Panasonic GH5.
Mm-hmm.
And by mistake, it was during COVID, and they sent me 2.
Oh, cool.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was pretty, you know, that was like the only good thing that happened this year. But the thing that I've shot and finished with it, I thought looked amazing compared to what I shot before. I mean, I was pretty excited about it, and I really don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, I actually, and I would check that Netflix list, because I actually think the GH5 might be on it.
Oh, is it?
I remember seeing 1 or 2 DSLRs that I was like, huh, that's on it. Like, I think it was like the SH1 was definitely on it, and there was one
so the slide that you showed was just a partial list.
Yeah, it's a pretty long list. It really is.
Okay, because that's what I was like worried. I was like, oh my God, I've already shot so much of my documentary, and like my cameras aren't on that list.
They showed is the
forget
most famous cameras that they use on Netflix right now. And again, like I made this slide show kind of thinking I might have a lot more new, you know, DPs, people looking to become DPs, that kind of deal. So that's what it was kind of like, here's some cameras that are getting the most play. But you know, the list is really long. The FX7's on there, the FX9. I'm pretty sure like all the Canon series up to right past the Canon 100 is on there. Yeah.
And we can just Google
it. Mm-hmm.
Netflix approved cameras.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
There you go.
So not all 4K is equal, because I have a Nikon, I think it's a 7800 that shoots in 4K.
Yes, it's a funny thing. That's a great question. So technically 4K is all made equal, but your color science is really what's going to matter, right? Mm-hmm. So like the color science, meaning the bit rate, this is stuff that I would start to look at. Because I mean, for example, the GH5 is 4K, but compared to my FX9, we're talking about an 8-bit camera versus a 12-bit camera. And so that's what kind of gives you a more like cinematic image. Also, you're looking at other things that make it more cinematic. Say you want sort of that wider screen look. That's like very much so for a feature film, a kind of standard like 2x3x1 versus like a 16x9. I'm talking about aspect ratios of like, you know, the squeeze, look, all that stuff is, you know, not standard in the GH5 versus it is like a standard setting in the FX9.
Okay.
Yeah. And I also wanted to ask you, do you have any questions with like collaborating with cinematographers? Because it sounds like, you know, you did this first film. Are you thinking about using the same cinematographer for this next film?
Not necessarily. I mean, she's a pretty good camera person, but you know, there were things that were lacking. She wasn't. I mean, if it was a stationary camera, it was fine. If we had to move or be on a gimbal or something like that, I didn't quite get all the shots that I wanted. So I just want to know more people in the community to have a better range of skills. You know, I think in terms of the next
Yeah.
project. So
I think something I did want to touch on during this lecture too is, especially, you know, I have I'm part of a Facebook group as well. I'm part of a ton of Facebook groups, but there's one that I created a while ago, specifically for women in film looking to get job postings. It's job postings only. And there's a ton of websites out there that's like that. And I think that's a great way to connect to people. I found, you know, even sometimes, like, you know, I'll post for one thing and then I'll find that I'm connecting with someone on something else. But just finding like a community and an organization where you can have like a list of cinematographers and then have a couple of different aesthetics. Like you might look at my stuff and be like, all right, she's got a lot of docs, she's got a lot of lifestyle, a lot of branded content. I'm looking for someone that does something that looks more like Drive, or like, I don't know, I'm just going to pull this up because I think it's fun. Like this slide here. Here's some films from 2020 that have actually inspired everything that I've worked on this year. I worked on a couple of different documentaries and, you know, branded content things. And this is like from like mood boards of films that have inspired some of the directors that I worked with. This is Nomadland on the bottom left there. I just worked on a documentary that was like, I'm in love with this look. Like, we need to recreate this look, and sort of like the blue and always at sunset. And just, you know, the skin tones looking really raw. We really tried to like make that happen. And it's a really different aesthetic, right, than like this one from Baby Teeth up in the top left, which is one of my favorite films this year. I think it's so good. Baby Teeth.
I haven't even heard of it.
Baby Teeth.
Oh, so good. It's on Hulu.
Oh, I'm gonna have to watch it. I have Hulu.
Yeah, it's so sweet. I love the way it was shot. I think the storyline's amazing. The acting is just brilliant. But
yeah, I'll watch it tonight.
Yeah. But aesthetically, it's very different, right? Not raw at all, tons of lighting, just completely, you know, completely different. And a little bit, it felt for me a little bit out of my wheelhouse because I came up in the camera department. I didn't come up the lighting route. So lighting's like a little bit more of a challenge for me. And that's why, like, as like a cinematographer, I have like my go-to gaffers. But I'm like, these are the women that I for sure bring on lighting wise, because they just.
Who are your women gaffers?
Yeah. This is a great question too, because I feel like knowing the local names of the ladies out here is so important. So Mila is really awesome. Mila Puccini. She is one of the most, I would say, more on the famous side of gaffers in the Bay Area. Vanessa Wu, who learned under Steelhip, who's Kiva Knight. He was the gaffer on Moonlight.
Okay.
And then
wow.
Yeah, and then Alba, gosh, I'm forgetting her last name right now. She's pretty new, but she also does directing and producing too, I believe. But her eye is just absolutely amazing. Abba Rowland, that's it, Abba Rowland. Naomi Garcia is really great.
With all these names, because I've struggled with that. I've tried to find. I always try to like hire, you know, women and women of color like as much as possible,
right?
You know, for my crews, and I've struggled like to try to, you know, find a woman gaffer. Like there was the one gal that I worked with before, whose name I'm forgetting, who kind of stopped gaffing and just now is a cinematographer.
Is it Deidre?
Deidre, yeah.
Yeah, I just saw Deidre today.
Okay. So,
I use Deidre a ton for gaffing as well.
Yeah. Well, she doesn't want to do that. I guess she wants to do more DPing now and stuff. And so then there was another gal that I had met, Lisa, and I can't remember her last name, but every time I've asked her if she's available, she always says no. So I'm like, I don't know what to do. So, but it sounds like you're the person to ask, you know, this question.
Totally. I mean, yeah, if you guys wrote down some of those names, I'd also recommend joining some of these groups. I like try to do a little post about it, but yeah, joining a rock paper film group, I think would be super helpful. There's a ton of lady gaffers on there. Hello Wanna Be on Set is another film group. Brown Girls Doc Mafia is an awesome film group.
I hella want to be on set. I like
I hella want to be on set.
And actually, how I get most of my television jobs is women. What is it called? Women in film television. Oh yeah, women in women working in reality TV.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that one I would say like I've gotten almost like 90% of my television jobs from, and usually those contracts are like 4 to 5 months.
Yeah, that's what I'm on right now, which is nice.
Right.
What's the name of your Facebook group?
It's called Rock Paper Film Club. I'm sorry, Rock Paper Film Group, for the actual group that does, the group itself is just for hiring. So people post jobs, people, get hired from that job, that little site. And then Rock Paper Film Society is the name of the organization. It's really similar to, Women in Film Bay Area. We do pretty much, we're just more like young millennials that just don't really, we don't got our shit together,
I think women in film San Francisco Bay Area is going to ultimately have a roster, a searchable roster, which is how I met Ina and Deidre and so
Deidre has a group as well, Badass Women in Film, right?
Okay, well, there you go.
Badass Women in Film and Photo, or something like that. Yeah. There's a ton out there, and
there's a lot of groups.
The more I like tap into those networks, it's funny how I like cross connect to people, but they all, I feel like there's only certain people that kind of post on Rock Paper Film Group, and then there's only people that post on Badass Women in Film, you know what I mean? So it's nice to be on all of them. That way you can kind of like see who's like organizing, and there's kind of a vibe, right? Like I feel like there's a vibe of Rock Paper Film Group where it's like a little bit younger folks, definitely like folks with experience, and then there's like the opposite of that where people are like really young and they want to get mentored, and that's kind of like what, honestly, like the whole reason why I got into the whole gimbal and drone world was because I saw all these posts on my group and I was like, no one's taking this job, like where are these ladies at? I was like, well shoot, I guess I'll become a drone operator and start taking some of the work.
So are there any other nuggets of knowledge in your presentation that we haven't addressed yet? I'm so curious.
God. I'm like, what did I even put on here? Gosh, I don't know. You probably, because I feel like you all are very seasoned, that you'd probably be better just to ask questions a lot. I'm putting up this slide here, which is my top things every DP should know, because maybe that way, some of you are looking to become collaborators and some of you are looking, to actually maybe like do some of the camera work. There was a couple things that I wish that I would have known so early on. I think the biggest ones on here is build an awesome reputation. That was my big one. And I think becoming an LLC and or just figuring out sole proprietorship, that like actually made my jobs become into a career. I'm sure you guys already feel the same way, know all this. Again, kind of newbie, every new DP should know. I don't know. Any questions besides this? I'm happy to answer.
Yes, I have a question. I totally have a question, because this is like, I'm not a DP, and I always tell people like, who, because how some of these job descriptions nowadays are like, they want you to do everything, and people hire you and they're like, oh, we need a filmmaker, and you're like, oh my God, you want me to do like 10 different jobs,
Totally.
So the thing is that I always tell people I'm not a DP, I'm not. I'm just a producer who has a camera and sometimes knows how to film things, So the thing is that like my deep knowledge, which is why I was so interested in like coming in and hearing what you had to say, because, when I've contacted you before, it's always sort of like, I've got this job and, and I need to do this and I need to find somebody who has your skill set and da, da, da. And I feel like I throw things at you a lot of the times, and I want to know if what I'm saying as a producer is really annoying. Like, so I guess the question is what are the things that, you as a DP, the questions or the demands that producers make that are perceived as, oh my God, this producer doesn't know what she's talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've never done this to me, but just like, some cold call things that are like, okay, like I know this is an experienced producer, or I know this is someone that, maybe is a little new. If you ask me for a resume, it's like, I got a reel, I got a website, I got, but a resume is just a really weird request for a DP. I just think that, you reading a list of everything I worked on, it's like, don't you want to see it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think like some weird questions, like when you said like they want you to do everything, I kind of view that role as more like a videographer, and I do take those jobs, but I usually charge more for those jobs because I have to do everything.
Right.
And I'll give you a quote as me doing everything, and I'll include in my, my budgets like producer, editor. I mean, obviously like these are different jobs, and I charge as if they are so, if that makes sense. And I'm trying to think of like what other weird producer requests. I mean, it all depends on the producer. There's one producer that I work with that mostly does photo, and she has requests like, hey, can you also throw some photo in there for video? And it's like, I mean, you can take stills from the video, sure. Is it going to look good? Probably not.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other weird producer questions that I think are just, and usually it's not like a producer question it's like a bad question. It's just it's more just like I can tell that you're new, or I can tell that you're just trying to appease the client, or you're trying to cut corners. Like a lot of times, like there's a reason why we have certain jobs. In documentary, it's a little bit lax because I know I've done documentary for so long and have produced documentary that I know the budgets are this big.
Yeah. Or there are no, but they're like,
there's usually not one. And it's at a
like, I just got paid the other day. That means I can spend all the money on you.
Yeah. And it's a total bummer. And like, I totally feel, and I usually, it's a weird balance for me as a DP of, I have friends, of course, now I have a ton of friends in documentary, and they're like, hey, so I have no money, but I really need you to make this thing look really beautiful so that I can get funding. And a lot of times, like, I'm not gonna lie, if you're my friend, I'll probably still throw you a little freebie in there. I'll work for something really low because I know you have to put on your taxes and all that, and then I expect you to hire me as the DP. Like, so kind of like just things like that, just these kind of basic negotiations, right? But in general, like, I feel like I've just like heard it all at this point, that it doesn't really bother me.
Yeah. Well,
it's like I want to get you
because I always feel like I'm I feel like I'm making DPs roll their eyeballs, because I get so much, as a producer, I get so much pushback from the client on budget, and it's like, then I always like have this like dreaded, like, I gotta call the DP back and tell them that we have to slash the budget in half. And so that's the type of thing that, that I guess I feel like I'm being like a horrible producer. I'm like,
you know what, honestly, like someone like me, and this is sort of the benefit of working with someone like me, where before this used to be like a deterrent, right? It's like, if you work with a DP who's also a producer, who's also an editor, it's like, do you specialize? Are you good at any of this? And it's like, you listen, my specialty is cinematography, but the reason why I do all these things is because I understand them. Like when you came, not that you've ever done this to me, but if you did come to me and you were like, hey, like the client / the budget, I get it.
So how does your day rate go? I mean, how much do you normally get paid? What's the industry range? I mean, what kind of variables go into your pricing?
That's a great question. I actually did want to cover this. So interesting enough, so there's a Bay Area standard right now. We are actually the highest standard in terms of rates. So it's a good and a bad thing, right? Because like in documentary, my rates go from $500 to $800 to hire me on as a DP. And then I charge for my equipment, right? So say that you wanted to look at that camera list and you were like, hey, I actually want to have an Arri Alexa Mini on this. Then we could just, we get the camera separately. Or sometimes I'll usually cut people a discount for using my FX9 and like say like the camera standard, like I think right now it's like $400 a day for the camera. I'll usually give you 20% off, sometimes 50% off. You know, it just kind of depends, like it's on negotiation. But in terms of standard rates, $700 a day for crew is the standard rate for corporate. Everything kind of goes union. So like how we like base our rates is we look at what union charges, and then we say, okay, we're non-union, so we're just going to charge the same thing as union. And typically you would charge even a little bit more because you don't have like the same workers' compensation, you know, healthcare, all that stuff. So all the keys, meaning an AC, a gaffer, an editor, they all charge $700 a day. A camera operator, sometimes they'll charge a little bit more, $750. I've heard some camera operators, usually their specialty, right? Like a Steadicam operator or a drone operator will charge somewhere between like $750, $800, $900 if they can get it. And again, this is corporate rates. We're not talking documentary. We're not talking narrative, you know, passion projects, just giving you standards. And then DPs are kind of negotiable. For corporate rates, usually it's around 1,000, but more like 1,200 to 1,400 for the day for corporate.
And that's not including equipment.
No. That's just your rate, and that's for a 10-hour day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then go to documentary, go to, you know, passion project feature. Me, I won't work for any less than 500 a day. The reason is because my CPA would have a fit. They'd be like, why are you doing this? You're actually spending more than you're making. You can't do it. So that's kind of where I've put my, hey, passion projects, hey, friends, hey, whatever. You got to give me that 500. And then if you do that, sometimes like, again, like if I'm being really, really sweet and it's my friend, I'm like, let's do the 500 and I'll just throw in some gear, you know, and just be kind of like under the table about it. Or, you know, I'll just say includes equipment. And a lot of times, like on documentary, I'll do 500 to 800 for the day, and I'll charge like $150, especially for my FS7, $150. You know, if you're going to hire me long form, like if we're doing like a 4-month contract, oh, wow. Yeah, I'm definitely going to, you know, charge less and less and less.
Yeah. What is your favorite film of all time in terms of cinematography?
Ooh. It's hard because I'm a story first person. Like, to be honest with you, like I love cinematography for sure, but I also really care about story. Like, and when anyone asks me that question, the first thought is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Just
Okay.
like just throwing it out there.
I'm gonna have to rewatch
and usually it's like,
then.
oh yeah.
Now I have to rewatch it with an eye for cinematography.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
I have to tell you, for cinematography, my recommendation is My Brilliant Friend.
Oh, okay.
It's HBO. It's HBO. It's beautiful. Every episode is like a Criterion collection.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's just knockout.
What's the story about?
It's about two girls coming of age in Naples in the 1950s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just a knockout.
I love that time period. I love period pieces.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. And I hope that you're going to be invited back to give your full presentation.